Hey guys, Genie Irish here with Compass, local San Diego Realtor, with our third installment of Let's Talk Loans with one of my preferred lenders and buddies, Amanda Silber with Movement Mortgage. Amanda, thank you for coming on and joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about this, actually.
Yeah, Amanda is not only a great friend, we have kids similar age. I'm very good friends with her husband. We've gone on trips together, but she's also in my Rolodex as one of my preferred lenders for various reasons. And I think what you really do well is you're communicative, you've got systems in place, and you're always available. And it's so hard as a mom, it's so hard as a wife, and so as a business owner. So my hats to you. I totally respect that, and you're always available for my clients, and I get it. So happy belated Mother's Day. And
Thank you.
one of the things that I really admire about Amanda and her husband, what they've chosen to do as a family, is to plan for the long term. As sales professionals, it's easy to buy the latest and greatest car and spend your money on, exciting trips and bottle service and all these things. But I've always admired their ability and desire to really put that money to work for them. And it's not in just flashy, beach condos and such. And it's really long-term planning. So having a lender that has experience for themselves is really your guide. I was fortunate enough to kind of be in that boat my first year in real estate. I still drove a 10-year-old Mazda. And before I bought another car, I bought my first house, which is now my investment property. And it's a 2-on-1 lot, which means 2 homes on 1 lot. And I had just been in the business for a year, and that was my biggest goal. And that it will set me up for retirement, especially for someone who is self-employed. I don't have a wonderful government, pension to look forward to in 20 years. So Amanda, tell us a little bit about planning. What does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely broad, right? So for me, it's whenever Jeannie or any of my agent partners refer me a client, the most important thing to me is to have a conversation with them about what is their motivation in purchasing a home? How was their planning? Are they thinking this is going to be a 2-year investment, a 5-year, 10-year? Are they going to keep it? Are they going to rent it out? Are they going to sell it when they upgrade to the next property? Get to know them and what their goal is, because if I don't ask those questions, I'm doing them a huge disservice, right? The most important thing to know is how long someone plans to hold the property for, because that's going to change how I structure the loan, how I advise them on their interest rate, how I look at the whole picture for them, right? So for me, getting to know them, getting to know their game plan, are they growing a family, whatever it is, right? Like if I have a couple that's a young couple, they just got married, they don't have a kid, and they're buying a 2-bedroom condo, it's probably pretty obvious that eventually they might want to get into a better school district eventually, or get something bigger. So, asking those questions and understanding what we can leverage at this time to help improve their future. That can be broken out into many different ways. I think we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth at the end of this call, or at the end of this Zoom call. But really, realistically, it's really just getting to know them. And as soon as I ask those questions, like it just kind of presents itself to me in like a very clear way of, this is what we need to focus on. This is how we're going to do it. And I'm going to give them advice based on what I would do if it was me purchasing the property. As Jeannie talked about, I'm very goal-oriented and very, I see the bigger picture always. I always think long-term. So my husband and I were lucky enough to have saved up money, and we have 4 properties in San Diego. And what we've done is, over time, our goal was to buy a home every 2 years, pretty much the year we got married up until last year, and we accomplished that. Now we've found a home that's like a really big fixer, so we're going to be doing that for a little while longer. But we were able to accomplish that goal because we had a clear idea of what we were going to do. We sat down and wrote it out, And it was actually not as difficult to accomplish as people would think, as long as you already know what the goal is.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to achieve it. And I like to help my clients achieve those goals, whether they're 6 months from now, a year from now. I've had, I don't know how many phone calls within this week or last week where they're like, we're just not ready yet. I'm like, it's okay. I don't care. There's no rush. Let me pull your credit. Let me structure your loan, and let's build that game plan together.
Yeah. So we have that long-term conversation of how to hold property, how, what the long-term goal, because that helps me evaluate. But planning it comes from, day one of just having interest in owning real estate. So it's not like, well, let me get my credit constantly, especially in my sphere. They don't even want to talk to me. They're like, no, Jeannie, I didn't want to call you until I had, 40,000 in savings, or until our credit score was this. And like, no, backtrack that. What if you don't need all of that savings? What if there's ways to pull from other sources, or, we don't want you going and depleting your savings just to pay everything off, and then you've got a zero balance. We need some credit, so that is part of the planning that both a lender and an agent can help you set up. It's not just how many properties do you want in your portfolio and long-term thing. Planning is from day one for sure. And I think having lenders that are patient enough, which means they're typically lenders who are productive, that don't need to chase that close. For instance, a little quick scenario from this weekend, I wrote on a property that was listed at 549. My clients are kind of approved to about 6. I knew they had multiple offers, so we wrote at 575, which is kind of their ideal budget. And the agent told me he's over 6. And so it was their first offer. And I think that, hits at home. Like, part of it is wanting this house so bad, and it's the first one and you want it to work out. And I just said to them, look, you've expressed to me 1 budget. 2, you've expressed that this is not going to be your long-term goal, your long-term home. You want to have a child, and you want to have a child live in a specific school district. I can't guarantee you that I can get you $50,000, or that you're going to break even, or that I can get you $3,500 in rent in 10 years on that house, because you are basically buying the most expensive house in this neighborhood. If you're going to live there forever and you tell me, Jeannie, this is it, we're going to have all our kids here, we're going to stay here at least 20 years, go for it, pay for it, because you love it and you have to have it. But if it's not, then let's take the emotion out of that first offer and go back to really your goals. Like, you've said budget, then you've said schools. So, it's kind of like had to talk them off the ledge. And if I was an agent who was just, chasing a check, I'd been like, yeah, let's just do 610, let's get it in escrow. And I know they wouldn't have been happy long-term. I mean, they'll be happy for the next 4 or 5 years. But does that serve their purpose of what their real goals are? And of course that always changes. Sometimes you get in a house and you're like, hey, I can stay here longer than I thought. That's how it felt for me in this house. But I think that is definitely something that you do really well, is that planning the short term. And just from step 1 of conversation, like, where do you guys want to go? What do you want to do? What do you think, as far as when you say you're using homes as kind of your growth, how is a home, how can you use it as what we call leverage to buy something else? How does that work?
Right. So let's talk about, you talked about leverage. I'm just going to touch on that real quick. So sometimes this isn't the minority, of course, but sometimes clients have more money than they need for the down payment, right? Again, it's the minority, but it's leverage, right? So when I have a conversation with somebody and they're like, well, I have enough for 20% down or 10% down, but I really want to put down, like, let's say they have enough for 10% down, because that's an easy example. But I have enough for 12% down. Should I put the 12% down? I don't think so. Usually, typically, and everyone's different, right? But most of the time, it makes the most sense to put down money in 5% increments, right? Or if you're doing first-time home buyer, it's 3%. So 3, 5, 10, 15, and 20 is where you start to see changes in your payment. And it's because the mortgage insurance costs can change, right? So if someone puts down 12% down, they're still going to have the same mortgage insurance rate as they would have if they'd put the 10% down. And then once I send them a payment scenario to show them, hey, you're just putting an extra 2% down on a, $500,000 purchase, this is going to make a very insignificant difference in your payment, right? It's 10 grand. It's probably less than $50. They're like, I just keep the 10 grand. I'm like, I agree. You're borrowing it for 3.25, right? Which is roughly where rates are right now, in the low to mid threes. If you're doing a government loan, it's even less. It's in the twos, right? So from that perspective, I always say, look, this isn't for everybody, but let me ask you this. What are you going to do with that extra 2% if you don't put it down on this house? Are you going to keep it in a savings account where it's going to lose money over time? Because we all know inflation is going to be crazy coming up pretty soon here, right? Or are you going to invest it in the stock market while it's low? Or do you have something else that you want to invest it in that money is going to grow? And usually the answer is it could maybe sit in a savings, or they want to invest it in the stock market. Now, I'm not a financial advisor, of course, and that's something where you can leverage that and have a conversation with somebody who is. However, if you could make 5 to 6% in the stock market, which is conservative, I know right now it's a little volatile, but it's very conservative for the stock market, and you can borrow that money for 3.25, why wouldn't you take that 10 grand, don't put it down on the house, and go invest it into something else, right? So that is something that I've lived off of, me and my husband, and he reminds me of it all the time. Like, I already know that's our plan, but every once in a while I'm like, God, we got 4 mortgages. Do we want to prepay those? Are you sure? Like, we're cash flowing on those. We could start, paying some principal down. And he's like, Amanda, we've talked about this so many times. Like, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, okay, I know, but okay. Thank you for bringing me back down to earth, Now, if I have a client who's retired, and this is an exact example that came to me actually in the field. She's buying an $80,000 condo in Bakersfield. She had $200,000 liquid cash in a checking or savings account. She said, I want to get a mortgage to finance this property. I'm like, well, what are you going to do with the $200,000? It's just going to sit in the checking or savings, is her response to me. Then I said, do not finance this. Yes, rates are low. They're in the low 3%. But if that $200,000 is not going to be making money for you, it's going to be losing money for you in that checking or savings account, take it and don't get a mortgage, right? You always need to make sure your money is making money for you. And it's like Warren Buffett is the biggest advocate for this, right? It's all about leverage. Like, if you're invested in the stock market, all the profit you make on those stocks, you reinvest back again, right? It's leverage, constantly leveraging the money that you have. Now, there is such a thing as over leveraging yourself, right? So you have to be responsible about it. You don't want to go get a big mortgage and have very little money saved up in the bank. That's something that we always talk about with the clients as well. But understanding leverage, I think, is super critical, and a lot of Gordon Ramsay fans are always like, you got to get a 15-year mortgage. Totally love the idea of a 15-year mortgage. It's super difficult for most people to qualify for that. Mm-hmm. And it's also difficult for them to cash flow if they were to rent that property out later, right? Another thing is too, with 15 years, yes, there's a difference in rate between a 15 and a 30. Sometimes it makes sense for people, sometimes it doesn't. However, if you're doing a 30-year mortgage and you want to pay that loan off like it's a 15, you totally can. Right? You can treat that loan however you want. You can prepay that principal balance and shorten that term on your own and save tens of thousands of dollars in interest on the back end. But when it comes to understanding how your money is going to make the most money for you in the next 3 to 10 years, that's something that I really can help you with. Does that answer the question on leverage?
No, yeah, that makes total sense. And one question I've been asking kind of everybody in these segments is, what are rates looking like today? And I know I didn't tell you that before we jumped on, so but why are rates so good? And is it still, in your opinion, a good time to buy?
Yeah, I mean, if you're renting, it's always a good time to buy, right? So some people think that because of the state of the market that we're in, we might see housing prices dip a little bit. And I think Gina are in agreement on that we don't see that happening really in San Diego County. Every market is different. We will say that over and over and over again. The US wide, countrywide, we are seeing differences there in other micro markets, but San Diego as a whole has not depreciated at all since this happened. In fact, I would say prices have gone up still because we're seeing a lot less inventory, right? And it's a lot more competitive because there are still people needing to buy and sell. So for some people, they might say, okay, well, I need to time the market. I need to get the lowest interest rate and I need to get the lowest price I can. Well, good luck with that. Who the heck knows what the bottom is, right? Yeah. I mean, I literally bought my house that I'm in right now at the end of 2018, thinking that it was going to go down in value. And it kind of sucked, but my rate was 4.5%, and I didn't want my rate to go up anymore. It's now been refinanced down to 3.25%. But I knew that I was going to be in this house for 10 to 15 years. Market is cyclical. It doesn't matter what it does a year from now or 2 years from now. I'm not selling it.
Right.
It ended up appraising for more than I paid for it. Doesn't necessarily matter.
Right.
I'm not taking that money right now. If you bought a $500,000 home, we could probably almost guarantee there's not likely to be a 10% dip in value in the next 2 years. But let's just say it happened, right? Let's just say housing prices crashed 10%, which would be a crash. That's significant, right? You bought a house for $500,000. It's worth $450 now. Guess what? You did the exact same thing as if you had already been renting. And you know, all that matters is that you keep that asset until it appreciates to where it's making you money, right? A really solid, super good example I like to give when I'm talking to clients about this, because I'm so passionate about it. It's long-term. Purchasing a home is not a short-term investment. This is a long-term hold, right? This is something that you're only going to sell it when it makes sense to sell.
Yep.
As long as you can make your mortgage payment or rent it out, right? Like when I bought my house, it was at the top of my budget. My payment was way more than I wanted. I'm 100% commission, relying on the real estate market, husband self-employed. If something happened, we'd be screwed, right? Like our mortgage payment was almost twice as much as our last house, right? I had backup plans all over the place. I'm like, well, in the end, I could rent it for what I paid, right? That was number one. I know that's not always the case for everybody, but even if you have to pay a little bit out of pocket every month, it still makes sense. Here's why. My husband purchased a condo before we were married. He bought that condo, I think it was like 2004. Don't quote me on that, but it was a little bit before the crash. He paid $185 for it. I moved in, we met 2009. This is right after the crash. The low point of that condo price was $101,000, which is pretty mortifying. Knowing that he put 10% down when he purchased it, and, it was pretty devastating. And he had a really bad loan on the property, but we were able to make the payments, right? And we kept making the payments, even though it was more than we would have paid in rent, because we could afford it. And we knew that eventually this market would recover, right? And so we didn't know how long. And turns out it took about 5 years for it to kind of like almost fully recover, maybe even less in some areas. So that condo today is now worth $290,000. So our payments were still reasonable. Like I said, they were a little bit more than what we would have paid in rent. And I understand that's not always everyone's circumstances, right? But if you purchase a home, it's for the long term. You just need to make sure that you have enough money saved or a game plan in place to be able to make that payment, whether you're renting the house out, you have to move out and rent it out, or you're making that payment above and beyond what you feel like you should every month, because eventually it's going to come back.
Yep.
Right? And I think for when I'm speaking with clients and I break down the math and really show them, like, look, even if the housing prices did go down a tiny bit compared to what you're throwing away in rent, it's almost, there's no question, like the owning a home will always make more sense.
Yeah. I mean, the tax benefits, for me, it's the emotional generational change.
Yeah.
That itself is not to go on a tangent before we wrap this up, but that itself is worth its weight in gold. Homeownership was important to me because it was important to my mom, and I want it to be important to my son because it's his piece of California, his piece of San Diego, and so that's crucial. And I have a lot of first-time home buyers, especially first-generation Americans like myself, that their parents didn't own a home here. So they are their, first generation of owning. And there's a lot of emotional, kind of like finessing that we have to do, because it is a big step in having someone that can, guide you. And especially if you're the first in your family to own a home, and it may, so much of the dream home and the American dream is tied up into this dream home. And here's this agent trying to tell you, like, no, don't worry about it being perfect.
Yeah.
This is not where you're going to land forever. You're 28, like in 20 years, you're going to live somewhere else. If that is your goal, I will take you there. It's just trust me. If this is, I'll look at schools, I will look at, rental prices and, that kind of thing. So absolutely, I think the planning is essential, but really understanding your goals have to be for you, not what we, tell you. Some people want to live in their house for the rest of their life. Fantastic. But planning is key. Planning is number one to every little component of home purchasing. Absolutely. So thank you. I do want to wrap real quick. I know that Movement Mortgage is doing a incentive right now for relief workers. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so right now, Movement Mortgage has assigned a program where I, as a lender, am donating $1,250 of my commission, and Movement Mortgage is matching it to total $2,500 credit for any client that is looking to purchase or refinance from now until June 30th. And that applies to hospital workers, frontline workers, is like police officers, firefighters, emergency services, response services, and pretty much anyone that works in a hospital in general at the moment. So I've been getting a lot of outreach about that, and I'm so excited and so happy that we're even offering it. It's a great program.
So it's not like a silent second or down payment assistance. It's just cool. Just a credit. Awesome.
It's a great question, because a lot of lenders will advertise things that look super cool and like down payment assistance sounds so much fun, but all that stuff is really expensive. Yeah. No, this is just a $2,500 credit that we just give to you, no strings attached.
Awesome. Anything you want to add before we wrap?
So something that I see a lot of is a lot of misleading information out there, right? And we talked about leverage. We talked about understanding long-term costs and things like that. Again, it's super important for me as a lender to understand the client's plan with the property so that I can really show them what the real cost is going to be, right? So just as one general example, if you're doing a conventional loan and you have mortgage insurance, that mortgage insurance isn't permanent. It could go away eventually, right? Whereas if you do an FHA loan, that mortgage insurance is permanent. It's never going away, right? If you do down payment assistance, those upfront costs that you end up financing, which don't always become very apparent upfront, those are very expensive fees actually, and you will pay for it. So understanding long-term costs is super critical. Not all lenders are good at or eloquent at explaining that, right? And so it's very important that you find a lender that is maybe been referred to you by someone. Ask those questions. What's my long-term versus short-term benefit of this program versus this program? How is my credit score going to impact me being able to get a better loan, right? And that's the part of game planning I love. I'm like, hey, if I get you a 680 to a 740 FICO score, we just took you from FHA, which isn't terrible, but not the best, to conventional, like best case scenario interest rates, right? With refinances, I see this a lot more than I do with purchases, but I do see it on purchases a lot, is rates that are advertised, even if it's verbally on the phone or online or in an email or a mailer that you get in the mail. They're pretty much all BS. We don't advertise interest rates, and it's for this reason. Every client is completely different. Every situation is completely different. Please don't compare your rate to somebody else's, because you're always going to be let down. Every program is different. Government loans, which are VA and FHA loans, those have lower interest rates than conventional financing because they have, FHA especially has higher costs in other areas. So you can't compare those things apples to apples because they aren't. Something that I see a lot of is, I'll use Navy Fed, for example, if that's okay. Navy Fed's probably one of the biggest competitors for VA loans out there. Right now, we're actually crushing them on rate, which is super exciting. But what I see a lot with Navy Fed, just one example, they are notorious for underquoting an interest rate and charging the client a bunch of points to buy that rate down. So understanding the cost of the rate is super critical. If you go on their website today, just look it up, go to their Navy website, look at their interest rates. If you go to the very fine print at the very bottom of the website, it says, all interest rates assume a 1% origination fee, which is 1% of your loan amount. So if we're talking a $500,000 purchase with 5% down, that's $44,750 just to do the loan, right? If you want to waive the origination, which you should, usually it makes sense to waive it, please add 0.25% to the interest rate displayed above. Mm-hmm. So now the interest rate that you're looking at that you think is 2.625 is really 2.875. And then also next to the rate is the discount points that they're charging you to buy the rate down.
Mhm.
So those are fees that are used to make the rate lower than what it actually is. When I give a client a quote, I'm always going to give them the quote with no cost.
Right.
No discount points, no origination, no extra, right? And that's critical because it's the most transparent way of me giving you a real interest rate. So when I have a refinance and I have a client, quoting them, like maybe I have poor credit, I'm quoting them 3.75. They're like, well, Quicken Loan's quoting me 3.25. I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm usually better than Quicken. Can you send me the quote? I get the quote and I look on the loan estimate, and then section A, origination charges, they're charging them 1.75 points, which for this particular client was $12,500.
Wow. Wow.
On a refinance, a lot of clients don't catch that stuff because they just add it to the loan amount. But you just added $12,000 in fees to your loan amount for no reason,
Mhm.
right? So really, you think you're getting a lower interest rate, so it might make sense, but there's a break even on these numbers, right? So again, understanding what someone's going to do with that property. Are you
Yep.
going to be there for 5 years, 10 years? Well, no, I think I'm going to sell in 3. Okay, well, don't buy the rate down because
Right.
your break even on that spread is probably 10 years to recoup
Mhm.
that. And you're paying interest on it, which isn't even part of my calculation
Right.
usually. So I have an example that we'll display for you guys at a $500,000 sales price. If just as kind of an estimate based on a 740 credit score, if you're putting 5% down and your interest rate today at a par rate with no cost for that interest rate is roughly about $2,067.
Mhm.
Now, let's say I give that quote to someone at 3.25, and then they come back to me and say, well, I have a quote for 2.99. Really, that seems a little low on a 30-year right now. Are you sure? Well, yeah. Okay, well, is there any cost? And they always say no.
Right.
And I'm like, can I see the quote? Can you give it to me in a loan estimate? Because I'll be the first person to tell you if there's a much better deal out there, I will tell you to jump on it all day long. If I'm like $200 more than someone else who I know is not a good lender, I will tell you, look, it's the difference in service. I'm going to get your loan closed. I'm going to answer your calls. It's the cost of doing business. It's up to you what you choose, of course. But I will be transparent and honest with you about what I see.
Mhm.
So for example, if you were to buy a rate down to 2.99%, just as an example today, the cost for me today at a 740 credit score is 1.5 points, which at a loan amount of $475,000 is $7,125. The difference in payment between 3.25 and 2.99 is a mere $67. So you're going to pay $7,000 just to save $67 per month. It's really easy to calculate what the break even is on that. You just divide the monthly savings into the upfront cost.
Mhm.
That tells you how many months it's going to be. It was like, I think 106 months. Divide that by 12. It was an 8.8 year break even to buy that rate down. Most people refinance or sell within 5 to 7 years. So if you just did that and you happen to refinance in the next 6 months, because let's just think it's possible that rates might get into the 2s. That's my little prediction. We'll see what happens. You just wasted $7,000 for
Yeah.
no reason.
Yeah. That's
And you can't get it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's gone. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that is my spiel. I get so infuriated when I see lender quotes with all these points being paid because it almost never makes sense to do it. And if my client trusts me, they allow me to educate them on that. And they know that I'm always going to come from a place of like, this is what I would do if I was you. If I'm way out of the park and for some reason I'm not competitive, which I 98% of the time I am, I will be the first person to tell you, wow, that's actually a really good deal. Go for it.
Yeah.
I've had clients where I'm refinancing them. They said, well, I have someone that tells me I'm going to get a no cost loan. What does that mean? Does that mean no lender fees? Does that mean no points? Or does that mean they're covering everything? Like all the escrow fees, the title fees, all your prepaids? What does that mean? And then I get the loan estimate from them and I'm like, they didn't cover anything.
Yep.
They just meant because they're not buying the rate down. So being educated, trying to find someone that you trust, and I get it. It's hard to find someone, but like I will be the first person to say, if you have a loan estimate out there and you just want me to tell you if it's legit or not, call me, send it to me. If you're not my client, it might take me a day to get back to you, but like I will straight up tell you if it is a good deal or not. And I'll be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you. I know we went over on time, but I really appreciate your insight. And we'll have your contact info, and we can go over all the different loan scenarios, planning, most importantly, and also that incentive that movement is offering. So thank you, Amanda, for being my third and last with Let's Chat Loan. So I appreciate it so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Jeannie. You too. Talk to you soon.
Bye.